So thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here. This is, I guess, pretty full circle for me. Let me get on the right thing. All right, so my background. I love technology. I love people. I love business and all those things coming together. So little known fact, in fact, my first Lightning talk was at DevOps Days DC, I think in 14 or 15. And so had a great time giving a lightning talk there, and just first times at DevOps Days, loved the conference overall. Came back to Baltimore, and I remember asking the organizers, this is pretty sweet, when you guys come to Baltimore? And they looked at me and they laughed, and they said, when you started in Baltimore. So started DevOps Days Baltimore. So chaired it for a couple of years here. Also was inspired by what you guys are doing, the DT Tech Slack, and launched the Baltimore Tech Slack. So we've been trying to drive a lot of the ecosystem and pulling people together here in Baltimore. So we're running an organization called Fearless. We are a digital services firm. Our mission is to build software with a soul. And vision is to create a world where good software powers things that matter. And when I say that, I mean like all the cool commercial work that's happening all over the planet, really, really great innovation. But when you think about things that really matter in the grand scheme of things, and we might be talking about education, it might be healthcare, it may be social justice, all these like really meaty issues. So oftentimes those are the ones that are like least funded, and they often have the least tech. And so we really exist to fill that gap and to be in that space overall and provide digital services, which I will talk about. All right, make sure something's wrong with my thing. There you go. All right, so what do? Really three things, right? Design, engineer, and deliver. So design is all about not just making things pretty, which all of our designers like coaching on all the time. My background is I'm a front-end dev, recovering. And so it's really about how do we ask the right questions to really understand like what the true problem actually is in the first place. And we do everything from user research to discovery. And I know many of the organizations that are on this call, this will resonate. I know you guys are in this space as well. Personas, et cetera, right? And really try to figure out what needs to be designed from a product perspective overall. Engineer, we will build little baby itty bitty MVPs and prototypes, and then we scale them up to hit millions of users and everything in between. And so we try to be relatively tech agnostic. And so for us, it really is about how do we solve the actual business problem that is meant to be solved, and using the right hammer for the problem overall, and deliver. And this could be everything from product design and product management, project management, agile management, coaching, et cetera. Or if there is an organization that is trying to figure out what this tech thing even is and how to transform it, how to use it, how to procure it, how to leverage it, we are able to partner with them and help them along in their journey. So we got a little bit of background. We've been doing it for a little over 12 years now. And so we'll share some experiences about what digital services is, what we believe it is, and what digital transformation is. So first, what are digital services? And again, a lot of these, I'm pretty simple, so I'm gonna boil these down. And I know there are a million definitions for all these things. This is the one that I tend to like. They are services that are delivered in the digital era, right? And so that means technically, if it's anything on the internet or some sort of electronic network, it is probably a digital service that is being delivered in that space. In addition to things that are delivered primarily in the digital era, my mouse is not behaving. All right, it is a code word when you think about government. So the government has a nasty code word for digital services. It is really like, how do we trick people that have more of a West Coast feel and West Coast companies to want to do business with the government? And so if you've done anything in the government sector before, the picture on the right may be familiar, the endless cube walls in those environments. And so yes, people want the slide, they want the open environment, but it really is more than just culture and cool, funky office space. It really is about the organizational practices and how you think about delivering agile capabilities and how folks are leveraging the cloud and other modern technologies, again, to deliver services that work better for the people. And that's ultimately what we try to do within the digital services perspective, particularly within government. So digital services are also, we tend to bin them at Fearless in these 6 major areas, but they are the things that we do to drive the business value or outcomes. Again, the things that we do. And so that may be from design to product management. It may be about how we think about data and interoperability in general. transparency, open data, all of those things in that space. Maybe it's around DevOps or, DevSecOps or DevSecTestOps or DevStarOps or whatever you want to call it. The word just keeps getting bigger. My assumptions will be like 10 things in the middle by the time we're done. Compliance, it could be around SaaS PaaS, IaaS solutions overall, and how we think about those implementations as people are leveraging the cloud and other platform as a service based solutions. So again, digital services are the things that we do, but it is all about delivering business value and all about delivering those outcomes overall. My mouse is not happy today. So how is it that we do them? Typically, we leverage what's called the U.S. Digital Services Playbook, right? There's many ways to perform these capabilities. USDS was really birthed out of the feeling of healthcare.gov from a federal perspective. And they came up with a playbook. They assessed a number of projects across the country from the federal marketplace and said, geez, a bunch of these things are failing. Let's get them to fail less. And so what do we need to do? Let's create a playbook. And if you follow these things, your project is probably going to do pretty well. So these are things that seem to be for folks that are in this space or may have done this commercially, understanding what people need, right? And talking to users seems fairly straightforward, but not a thing that was happening readily in the federal marketplace. And so they said, follow these things. Chances are that you will do pretty well in this space. And so we tend to follow the digital services playbook. There's a link here. If this is new to you, feel free to check it out. They've got, it's pretty laid out. There's checklists and ways in which you can figure out if you're following this playbook. We've seen where a number of procurements actually call this out by name. And so the government is starting to get in tune with calling these things out and looking for them in their vendors and people that are supporting them. So digital services are the things that we do to provide a particular outcome. They're the things that we do to deliver on business value that we're trying to achieve. What in the world is digital transformation? This, like everything else, a million definitions for this thing. And it may be for the innovative thingies that your organization is looking at. And so you may be thinking about, oh, it's definitely machine learning and AI, and we're doing some really cool stuff with blockchain, and that's what digital transformation is. I'd argue that there are a number of organizations that are still on mainframes and are trying to figure out how to just build a web app. And so transformation can be everything in between. And so you may have seen words around, it's modernization and perhaps people are thinking about, how they go paperless or, big data or cloud or leveraging, machine learning or artificial intelligence. And so all of those things might play a role. But again, if we think about the previous definition and the things that we do to provide business value and outcomes, these are around the digital services. And so how we like to define digital transformation is if the services that we do produce a product or a solution, then digital transformation is the mindset and the culture that gets you there. So digital transformation is all about the organization ensuring that they get out of the way to make sure that your service, your product gets to the finish line. It doesn't matter how agile your organization is or how quickly we built the awesome CI/CD pipeline and we can push to production every minute. That may be true, but if there are constraints within your organization that say whatever goes to production, we've got to have a change board look at it, or we need 6 months to get an ATO, an authorization to proceed before it can get to the user, that business value has never gotten to that user. So it doesn't matter how fast you got there. The organization needs to transform to enable your digital services to be more effective overall. So, all right, so you got to get a new mindset. You got to think about, new culture. Like how do you get this new brain, and how do you adjust, and what it is that this looks like, and what do you need to do? And we'll give a couple tips along the way. And so I'm going to take you back to basics. I'm going to be very sad and I'm going to cry if you've never heard of the Agile Manifesto. If you have, good for you. I'm going to take you back to basics. And so 17 folks gathered and said, the way software was being delivered isn't really working. And so we've got to rethink how software is delivered overall. And so they said all of these 8 things that are things that we value within the software development lifecycle. The things on the right, we value processes and tools, contract negotiations, following a plan. But the things on the left, we value more. And so that means working software, we value more than comprehensive documentation. It does not mean we don't value documentation. It just means we value working software over it. And I would argue that the most underrated, undervalued word, one word in the Agile Manifesto people don't talk about nearly as much is the word over. Over is a really interesting word, right? And it's really interesting for a number of reasons. When you hear the word over, it means that it implies a priority. It implies that if you have two things to do and you've got to pick one, something has got to win out. And they're saying the things on the left ought to win out. When you hear the word over, it implies intention. You've got to be very intentional about actively doing the things that are on the left. And so you're thinking about how to make sure that working software is what's important and what's being driven. Over also implies sacrifice. It means that the things that are on the right, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiation, you have to actively think about cutting those and not doing those things as much so that you can do something else. Over means behavior. So if in your organization, right, and again, think about how the Agile Manifesto was birthed in the first place, right? It was things that were happening within organizations weren't delivering great software. And so the culture was producing bad outcomes and they wanted to fix that culture. That culture was made up of a bunch of bad behaviors at that point. And so it means you have to actively stop doing a thing, start doing another, and change your behavior. And finally, over implies culture. All of those things bubble down to, if you're not doing the things on the left over the things on the right, it implies your culture needs to be adjusted as a whole. So how do we sprinkle some of that DevOps on it? How do you get this thing to be fixed? Do you just sprinkle some on? No. And as much as Salt Bay would want you to believe that that's the case, it isn't. It's really not how it works. It is a journey, and it is a walk that happens between, it might be a customer and a vendor, whoever's working and performing the digital service in that organization and or person, your product owner that is procuring or wants those digital services. It is a walk that starts together and a journey that begins between the team. So where do you start? I'll give you a couple tips of some things that we've learned over the years, and hopefully these things are helpful to you. The first thing that we see as a part of the digital transformation as you're delivering digital services is you've got to empower teams. And so when you have this like traditional bureaucratic, like top-down leader, mandating, you've got to do this, and it's kind of slashing everybody down, right? That's not an environment that will enable strong digital services and transformation to happen, right? You've got to empower teams and allow the teams, right? Whether you're doing, doesn't matter what flavor of Agile you may be doing, right? The team decides, right? And they deliver the outcome that's responsible to get the business value that you're expecting. Second thing that we've seen is that everyone needs to be a part of delivery. Many times we see in organizations that there is a delivery team or a software team and they own delivery. And so the marketing folks are over here, the ops folks are over here, the business folks are over here, and say, why is the software out the door yet, right? And they kind of look and they kind of wagging their finger down at the delivery team, the software folks. That does not breed and not drive digital transformation. Everyone has to be part of that digital transformation. And that means everyone is accountable for that business value to be realized by that end user. It is not just a part of the organization, it is the entire organization that has to be part of that process. Second thing we've seen is that the users have to run the show. So we like to call it like, we've got the users powered by the delivery team, and then everyone else is after that. That means your policy folks. That means your people ops or HR. That means your recruiting. That means your security. That means your operations. Everything else supports delivery and that end user. And that end user has to run the show because ultimately we are building something for them to drive value for them. It is going to take patience and you've got to practice it, and it's going to take discipline. This is not an overnight thing. Again, talking about the Agile Manifesto, especially when you start talking about cultural things, like listing the value, relatively easy. Getting people aligned to that value, a little bit more difficult. Now, changing behaviors to map into those values, extremely difficult, and it does not happen overnight. And the larger the organization may be, the longer this alignment takes, right? Turning the Titanic takes time, and it takes a lot of intentionality along the way. Oops, wrong way. And lastly, do not reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of capabilities that are out there. We talked a little bit earlier about the digital services playbook. Feel free to use that, adapt that. We've got a number of playbooks on our website. I know a number of organizations within kind of DC Tech Slack, they use lots of playbooks as well. So leverage that, reuse them. Would love to hear your lessons learned. Please share them with the community at large, in how you're doing digital services and how you're doing digital transformation. And so with that, no Q&A. So I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Delali. That was really great. Everybody can do a little emoji clap for you. Now, I know you had to go, but I can get the link to your slides later and share that with the group. And if anybody does have questions in chat, if you're able to stick around and answer those, that would be great. But thank you so much. That was really awesome. I really appreciate you coming out tonight. Great.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Next up is Stephen Black with Rhythmic Technologies, who's going to be talking to us about creating pristine Terraform code. Are you ready, Stephen?
I'm ready when you are.
All right. Go for it.
All right. Let me share my screen. So this talk was kind of born out of just trying to find a fun thing to share with people. Not particularly necessary for creating awesome Terraform. Well, not necessary for creating Terraform, but if you want it to be awesome and you're particular about small things like spelling, formatting, linting, then yeah, it's necessary. So picture is of me and my son. And I've watched a few tech talks lately, and it seems like it's become customary to introduce your fur baby. So this is my son holding our fur baby Coconut on Halloween. He is a king in that picture.
Code.
Huh?
I see a Visual Studio Code open on your pop slides.
Oh.
Oh, yep. Sorry about that. I wasn't sure if you were meaning to show us code.
Well, in a minute. Thanks, Fanjo, though. Let's see. Well, here's the PowerPoint. Anyways, so awesome. First, I'm going to give you a bit of background on Git, then the pre-commit framework, and then a brief demo where we will look at that code you were just looking at. So without further ado, when somebody goes to add changes to their Git history, they literally add the changes. But before it gets saved, they need to commit it. And that's where you're committing the changes to the Git history. And you got to write a little message, and there's a few hooks that go on. And then things get saved to the Git history, and you can Git push, and it'll show up on GitHub, and success. I mentioned when you commit, there's a few hooks. Now a hook is a design pattern. It lets you run other functionality from within something else. So in this case, Git is running some Python scripts that manage a whole bunch of all kinds of different scripts that do whatever it is you want. In our case, it's create documentation for Terraform, do security scanning, do some linting, do formatting, and then a few other kind of generic Git repo things. Pre-commit is a hook, but it's also a framework for managing pre-commit hooks. And that is the really nice thing about it, is you can just add a little YAML file to your repository, and then you get all these automated tools for free. So pre-commit is a package manager, and package manager I always thought was kind of like a scary term because you hear people talk about brew or apt or whatnot, and it's actually really simple. Like everyone here is familiar with package managers. The App Store is one, Google Play is one. They're super duper simple. So we get four Terraform specific pre-commit hooks. Terraform docs, because pretty docs are awesome. One called TFSec, which is a security scanner, and it will go over your code, make sure you're not doing anything egregious like saving a password to the code in plain text, or opening up a security group to the whole world. It'll throw an error. It'll let you know. And if you do want to do something like that, you've got to tell it with a little comment to tell it to ignore. Hey, we're doing this on purpose, because there are cases where you want to do what might be considered outlandish things. Terraform lint, or just TF-lint is its name, and that does a bunch of best practices stuff. My favorite thing about it is it will enforce naming conventions. So we use snake case for naming, but it does other things. And then Terraform format, because obviously like it's built into Terraform if you ever used it, and it just makes everything look pretty and readable. So the demo is simple. I'm gonna run the hooks, kind of show you what they look like when everything is good. We'll add a bug, and then we'll try to commit it, and it'll tell us what we're doing is wrong and fix it. So I think I'm gonna have to unshare and switch to the VS Code window. There we go. So you guys see VS Code?
I think we see your side still.
Okay. Now we're good?
Now we're good.
Awesome. So this is that pre-commit file. It is YAML, so I'm not gonna make you guys look at it too long. Otherwise you'll go cross-eyed, but it just specifies the different hooks we wanna pull in, and then how we wanna run them. So let's run the pre-commit hooks. So we have Terraform docs. It should say everything passes. Format, we have one that lints without credentials. We can also lint with credentials, and it will actually make API calls to AWS, make sure all the things we were trying to talk about are actually there. And then these down here are for just general Git repository stuff, making sure JSON files are formatted, making sure there is a new line at the end of every file, like just general best practices. So let's open up our Terraform code, and let's define a variable named password. And this will definitely throw off our security scanner. And then these are, they turn off Terraform lint. But I think that is sufficient to throw a bug. Well, throw an error. So we have to initialize before we run. We'll add it to our stage changes, so then we can commit it. Now first, Terraform docs threw an error. It's because we added a new variable, and it adds documentation for us. Now, TF-lint is thrown an error saying, hey, you have a variable with no description, it is no type, it's declared not used. That's also declared not used. TFSec did not throw an error, so that's interesting, but not of concern. So let's just reset it, restore it, so there are no more changes. That file again, looks perfect. And everything is good. So let's say you do want to commit a bug, or something you would consider erroneous. We'll add it. Oh. Yeah, it fails. You can do no check in Git, and it will not run the pre-commit hooks. Added password variable. And I will show you how I publicly shame myself usually when I don't obey my own standards. There we go. So now you should see Google Chrome. If not, I'm sorry.
We see it.
We do. We see it.
Yes. So you've probably heard of GitHub Actions. Hopefully you used a few, but we have GitHub Actions that will run each of the different pre-commit hooks, as well as stuff like spell checking to make sure everything's spelled right. So this one, it failed. And what do you know? It failed the TF-lint and the TF docs. Okay, just TF-lint. And there is also a workflow that will apply automatic changes. So if it's small stuff, like let's say they don't have the pre-commits hooks installed and they added variables or something, and it didn't get added to the documentation in the README, it'll do it for you. So very, very new age, very CI/CD, very cool and fun. But with that, I'm finished.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. That was really great. We did have one question for you since we have a couple more minutes left in your time. What is a GC? Was that an alias for git commit?
Oh yeah, sorry.
No worries. Anybody else have a question for Stephen? No worries. I did. There's a question about why is it called lightning talks? So lightning talks are 10 to 15 minutes in length. That's kind of just the name for that style of talk. So that's why we're doing lightning talks tonight. So I did not actually know that there was such a thing as a lightning engineer. So I apologize if I misled anyone. But great. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a really awesome talk. I really appreciate you taking the time to demo for us tonight. And there are links in the chat that Christina posted to Rhythmic Tech, as well as Camille found the TFSec GitHub link. So definitely check that out. I'm trying to figure out how to save the chat. So our next speaker tonight is Camille Clayton, who I should have made a co-host. So you should have ability to share your screen, Camille. Ooh, I love your background. It's very sparkly. And I can unmute you as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
One sec.
I can do an intro for you. So Camille Clayton is the operations team lead for Pluribus Digital and is also a DevOps lead for Women Who Code.
Thank you, Victoria. Let me share my screen. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming out this evening. I just wanted to give a little talk on a situation I find happens more often than not. So you've inherited a system. Once again, I'm an operations team lead at Pluribus Digital. My name is Camille Clayton. So a little bit more about me is I have about 3 years now in federal contracting, 5 years private in tech, and then about 5 years managing inventory, stockers, cooks. I've been a head cook, receiving manager, and a number of things in between. And key skills then are systems integration. I love when something new comes in unexpectedly and it needs to get working with something old. Solution engineering scenarios where there just is no budget to resolve something. And incident management, ultimately, there's going to be fires, and how can we stop it? If you have a real fire, I can't stop that. But this evening, I want you to take a moment and just lean back in your chair a little bit and imagine that you, regardless of where you are in your life right now, you're a newly hired mid-level engineer. You've got about 5-6 years of experience out of college, And about 3 weeks into your new role, you're super excited. Your team lead puts in their notice. Now, this person's been the senior engineer, and they've been at this company for a while. And so as things are getting hot and heavy, as there's sort of that scramble to deal with the absence of this person or the coming absence of the person, you're feeling that pressure. And as you talk to people, as you learn about the team, you find everyone's pretty skilled, but there's a lot of niche players. And what I mean by that is, like, you've met that DBA who can churn out reports, but doesn't know anything about RDS or the servers that database lives on. You've probably met an automation person who has no idea how the networking stack works. And maybe you've met a business analyst who will try anything, but just can't ever quite get logged into a server. And well, that's your team for this scenario. And so as you begin to deal with this scenario, you can start to think about it in terms of political science, where it's called a power vacuum. And in a power vacuum, it's where someone who had a strong force is no longer a presence in a place, for however many reasons why. But in our case, the person is just, they put in their notice. And so with that, there's an absence of knowledge and communication, all those things that this person was handling. If there's not a smooth transition, it creates chaos. And so I want you to buckle in. I want you to grab pen and paper, and go pick up a good moleskin, something light, something that can be your friend during this time. And first things first, I want you to talk to people. You need to figure out who and what's important, and how you do that is just by interacting with people. If we're back in the office, I would say, take the time to meet people when they're at work, while they're getting coffee, whether it's before or after meetings. Just get to know people, because as you get to know people, they'll tell you what's important, what's frustrating them, where things can be improved, where things are rock steady, things you don't need to worry about. And so all of that info that you're going to glean, and it's not going to come from Confluence, it's not going to come from Jira. It's always going to come from people who are affected by the system. And ultimately, all of that sort of secondary, tertiary knowledge, that's your inheritance in this situation. And so once you start and are beginning to successfully figure out where things are going, where do you fit into this bigger picture? And so thinking back to this person that you're inhabiting for this moment, I want you to ask some questions. Is upper management concerned during this chaotic period? Are you finding your teammates are stuck on tasks? Are they blocked? Are they, bringing up, well, that person usually does it, and that person's not there anymore? Or is any work actually happening? And in times where I've encountered these scenarios, there's a lot of times where no work is happening. And it's not necessarily through the fault of any one engineer. It's not necessarily through issues with people being lazy or not wanting to work, but just the nature of people is that as we, inhabit a role, and things are used to coming into you as a certain way, stories being groomed in a certain style, however it may be, we often lose touch with that concept of just, handling things on our own, and people may not be ready to take that leap and, make their own work for themselves. And so I want to talk a little bit about a sociological concept called legibility or status legibility. So now that you know the team, you're beginning to figure out where the systems are and the key players, the stakeholders, what you want to land on, and hopefully landing feet up like this cat, is a place of status legibility where you have a role in the group. So your team is a social group, and whether you like, dislike, or have any other feelings about your coworkers, you should ultimately want to try and make it work, and you hopefully are going to try and make it better. In the context of this scenario, a person who is key to the stability of that group is gone, and the group's dynamic is going to change. There's no way around it. The group is different and will forever be different because that person is left. And so then as you start to find your way into the team, your actions are going to affect how you can both join in, interact, and find place within your group. And hopefully that group brings you in with open arms. That's always the best case scenario. But more often than not, you may be met with iciness. And so you have to think for yourself at that moment, as these events happen, how you want to place yourself in that. One thing that may happen to you is you may be asked to take on a lead role, and you may find yourself in looking into sort of that metaphorical mirror and thinking about whether or not you are ready for a role like that. You've been at your career 5-6 years. You've been a mid-level engineer at a couple, for a couple of those years. Maybe you are ready to take that senior lead role, but maybe you're not. And knowing that, knowing it often more quickly than not, can really help you. Oh, apologies, I have been looking at this cat. But I was on the wrong screen. But so hopefully then, as you figure that out and as the situation plays out, you land on your feet. And diving a bit past that social aspect, then you start to get back into the nitty-gritty. And ultimately, wherever you land, wherever you inherit, is going to be involved with what's called tech debt. Tech debt is both a concept and an artifact of previous engineering, previous development work, previous operationalizing systems that you're left with. It may be ill-documented, may be very well documented, or somewhere in between. And so ultimately you want to reduce that unknown, unmaintained, unmanaged side of the business. And so you want to tackle that, but you want to tackle it as a best effort, a goal, as something high on the shelf. But you shouldn't ever be tackling tech debt over, literal fires in your data center, in your cloud environment, things that are causing you problems, causing your team to get called. You should always find a balance. And you also shouldn't neglect new features solely to reduce tech debt, because ultimately you'll never be rid of 100% tech debt. As soon as you create code and you're no longer able to touch that code base for whatever reason, it's tech debt, even if it's just been 3 days since last time you worked on it. And so with that, what you get into is, there are politics around that. Some months you might find it easy going to reduce this debt. Say your boss comes up to you and is like, hey, is there any way we can cut our AWS bill? And you might go to them, well, there's this old, IP server, but, we've switched over from IPAM to AD, and AD handles all that. And the tech lead had just kept it going as a backup, it was what they're used to. It was the system. And, reducing that, turning that server off might be able to quickly save you $150, $200, $500 a month, depending on what it is. But then other months, you're going to have much larger things that sort of hit your plate. There might be a thing like a microservice that handles core piece of business logic, but the last commit was from before even the lead started. Say it's 4, 5, 6 years old, and that tech lead was there for, say, 3 years, 4 years prior. And well, this code is both fragile and very mission critical. Everyone's afraid to touch it, everyone's avoided it, and that's why you're looking at it now, maybe 6 months after you've been hired, and you're like, oh, we need to do something about this. Maybe it's running on Java 6 and everything else in your stack is running on Java 11. And so, tackling those things with both sort of a foresight for where you want to land, but also really tackling it when it should be a priority versus just something to, add to the list is crucial. And that's ultimately how you're going to tackle that next part, which is impact. So every day in your life, you encounter systems, whether you consciously think about them or not. And so with the system at your job, or lack thereof, it may be pure chaos. There may not be a single thing written down. But once you accept that's the state of the universe, you can really begin to make an impact at your new role. You have to roll into it. You have to take on ownership of this thing that no one else is really owning, is really managing. And with systems, it's going to take at least half as long as the lead was there, or whoever you're replacing, whoever you're shadowing, following in the shadow of, to really understand the system, understand the services, understand the people. You need to go at least a year before you've seen all the various seasons of business needs, scenarios, requests from products owners, semi-annual, annual reporting, to really get the full picture. And then say that lead was there for 3-4 years, it's going to take another 1.5 years, 2 years after you get to that halfway point to really, replace, update, repair, and redesign systems that already exist. And once you begin that process where you're making changes, you're owning this system and you know it, you're becoming that sort of guru, that sort of critical piece of the system. That's where you make the most impact. And so knowing it's a long haul, knowing that it's going to take a good long while to put your signature on things, both gives you a lot of room to take a step back and really appreciate the work that was done previously, but also know that if you keep with it, if you continue to fight a good fight, you're going to make a lasting impact on the company. You're going to make a lasting impact to your team. You're going to make a lasting impact on systems that people will continue to use well beyond, when your tenure ends. And so with that, I really thank everyone for taking the time tonight. If anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. But if not, I will be here for the rest of the show. And you can always reach me at Camille on Twitter.